Health benefits. They're a headache, whether you're an employer or an employee. Out-of-pocket costs, deductibles, co-pays, each another reason to avoid going to the doctor. But why does it have to be this way? At Gravie, we don't think it does. We're reimagining the employer-sponsored health benefits market, showing how small and mid-sized businesses can punch above their weight with benefits plans employees will want to use. We even think they'll love them. On It's a Gravy Thing, we'll explore existing and upcoming innovations in the health benefits space, improving the ways small and mid-sized businesses provide affordable healthcare coverage to their employees. We'll hear from experts on what works, what doesn't, and what changes they'd like to see. Affordable, comprehensive health benefits are something employees expect from their workplace. That's easier said than done, especially for employers with smaller workforces where risk is spread out among fewer people. But with more than 60 million people working in businesses with fewer than 500 employees, it's time for new approaches to health benefits that meet the needs of employers of all sizes. A recent solution for this is something known as an ICHRA, or Individual Coverage Health Reimbursement Arrangements. An ICHRA allows an employee to pick the health benefits plan they want, but still get it covered by their employer through tax-advantaged defined contributions. ICHRAs rolled out just a few years ago, but they're already revolutionizing benefits for smaller companies, and companies of all sizes are starting to take notice. Here to speak to the origins of ICHRAs themselves is one of their architects, Blase. Brian served as the special assistant to the president for economic policy at the White House's National Economic Council from 2017 to 2019 and is now the president of the Paragon Health Institute. But we want to go beyond policy to see how this plays out in the market. For that, we have Cory Wiskow, president of Wealshire Alzheimer's and Dementia Care in Minnesota. Running a small business with just about 200 employees, Cory's health benefits options had been slim. So company healthcare costs were high, while employee satisfaction was low. He says ICHRAs have changed all of that. We'll also hear from Gravie's very own Mann, SVP of Sales, who will share insights on how the market is responding to the availability of ICHRAs and what innovations we can expect in the future. So, let's get into it. Well, it's great to be here with you guys. Thanks for agreeing to talk to me today about ICHRAs, Individual Coverage Health Reimbursement Arrangements. We've got Eric and Brian and Cory. I think where I wanted to start was just recognizing the elephant in the room is that most of our listeners might be unfamiliar with what an ICHRA is. They're relatively new, and we're hoping to help both employers and brokers understand why they should be considering ICHRAs. And at Gravie, we think of ICHRAs as another non-traditional solution for providing employees with health benefits. We talk a lot how at Gravie in particular, we're making this feel like a group-like product in the individual market. So I think a good place to start will probably be with the birth of ICHRAs. And Brian, we're thrilled to have you with us today, recognizing that I think you were there and helped create what is now known as ICHRA. So if you could just tell us a little bit about the impetus for ICHRAs and, kind of how they came to be in 2020 and what the need was that you were meeting.
Sure. Well, I'm glad to do this. This is going to be a lot of fun. In the fall of 2017, the Congress had just gotten through sort of its ACA repeal and replace efforts. Didn't make a lot of progress. Inside the Trump administration, we wanted to take actions to expand options for small businesses and workers. And the president signed an executive order that laid out several actions that we thought we could take through the regulatory process to expand options for the individuals that really had been harmed by policy over the previous decade or so. Small employers were increasingly not offering health insurance, and sort of middle-class families were seeing rising prices for health insurance. The Treasury Department gave us the idea. They said that some of the restrictions made in the previous administration they thought were unwise, and sort of laid the groundwork for how we could move to defined contribution health insurance. It took about 2 years. It takes a very long time to go through the regulatory process. But in late spring of 2019, we released the final rule, and ICHRAs launched in 2020. And really what ICHRAs do, most people get their health insurance through their employer. But workers don't have a lot of choice over the particular product that they choose. It's really the only major financial decision that we allow the employer to make on our behalf, and they narrow the choices. They give people one or two options. So what if the employer would just provide the contribution and the worker could take that and buy the plan in the individual market that works best for them? People used to get their retirement benefits through a defined benefit pension plan. But in 1980, there was 401ks created where the employer provided the contribution and the worker took it and made the investments that they thought worked best for them. Same idea with ICHRAs. The employer provides the contribution and the worker takes that contribution and picks the plan that's best for them.
You know, it's funny, Gravie was launched in 2013, and well before ICHRAs had a name or were a thing, we joke all the time that we were providing ICHRAs because Gravie started our original business model. We didn't have a health plan of our own at that point, was to work with employers in small and mid-sized businesses to provide a defined contribution and then work with a Gravie advisor to help navigate the marketplace to identify your, the benefit that worked for you. We didn't have it codified into law or regulations, but it's funny to see how it's going. And clearly it's been working. You know, the ICHRA Council released a report recently that showed us that there's been significant growth in the number of employers who are offering ICHRAs. Between 2022 and 2023, we saw 170% growth in the number of employers offering ICHRAs, which is just wild, right? That's significant growth. So the word is out. People are catching on to the fact that ICHRAs are a really good option for employers who want something different. And, you know, I think while they started and continue to be really important in the small and mid-sized market in particular, because those groups are inherently have, adverse policies when it comes to risk pooling, you've got a smaller population, but we're seeing growth in ICHRAs, even in the large employers. I mean, I think publicly traded companies are now starting to offer ICHRAs. Eric, I'm curious from your perspective in the marketplace, what are you hearing from employers? Are they approaching, or brokers too? Are brokers approaching you about ICHRAs? Do they know about them? Are we having to tell people about them to begin with? How does that education begin?
Yeah. And I think it's both. Honestly, I think, ICHRAs are gaining traction. Defined contribution's been around for a while. Back to the 401k conversation and topic, allowing for employees to have more choice and flexibility as it relates to their products. But what happened in 2020 really, I guess, added jet fuel to the opportunity for employers to get out and have an alternative to risk pooled products or underwritten products and just offer a defined contribution approach. And, I think over the last 2 years specifically, we've seen it at Gravie just be an increase in popularity because coupled with double-digit trend increases in those markets year over year, it just gets unsustainable for the small business. And looking for an alternative where you can just give a defined contribution or a dollar amount to employee to buy their own health insurance plan in a pool of products in some states where the decrease in monthly premium is sometimes 5 to 10% less than the products in the group market. It's turning as well as an alternative to group benefits where it's not a one-size-fits-all model. It's also turning into a product that can save some employers money.
Yeah, absolutely. And are you seeing an uptick in brokers who are reaching out proactively and looking for more answers about ICHRAs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think ICHRAs, if you go to HR groups, if you go to talks online or podcasts, ICHRAs are gaining a ton of traction in the space as an alternative benefit solution. And when an employer comes to their broker who is a consultant for their business and says, I can't do this anymore. I'm calling uncle, right? I need an alternative here to be able to provide benefits to my employees at a sustainable cost, right? It's gaining a ton of traction with the broker community as well.
Yeah, and Brian, I imagine that was the intent, right? Was to catch on like fire here, get people to see the value that these can provide and, watch how these take off and how different companies evolve their product offerings.
Yeah, when we launched, we didn't anticipate the pandemic.
Right.
And so ICHRAs launched in January of 2020.
Just
and
in
I think
time.
it was always, we thought there would be some education and it would take a while to ramp up. And then you had the pandemic. And I think during the pandemic, It was a very tight labor market. Employers were not thinking about their health insurance coverage during the pandemic. They were thinking about how they could stay in business. And I think you have a lot of reluctance to make any changes that could cause some employees to have an adverse reaction. So I think now coming out of the pandemic, 2023, I think we are starting to see much more interest in ICHRAs as a policy solution. Cory, obviously they've moved to that model just the past few months, and I think it's going to continue to, we will learn lessons too. Like there are some implementation challenges that I think we're working through. And it took 401ks a long time to sort of become the dominant way that people got retirement investments. So I think it'll take some time.
It's a new way of thinking about health benefits for sure. And, I think employers for a long time have thought about health benefits as a check the box kind of thing, partly not to their own fault, partly because there were just so few options that worked for them. And I think what we're seeing now is, the creation of these newer options. And Cory, I'm curious, like, how did you first learn about ICHRAs? I know, and if you could tell me a little bit about, what you had been offering before you switched, because I believe ICHRAs are new in your organization.
Yeah, we're brand new. Right, great to be here, listening to how this all came to be. Right. Being new to the ICHRA family, how it came to be in 2023, we were doing our renewal. We started with a fully funded insurance plan for our employees. We did that for 5 years. Every year, more expensive, more expensive, right? And then we said, okay, we're going to make this switch and we're going to go to a fully self-insured, right? Why won't we be some of the insurance people, right? That's what we wanted to do. And so we took on that risk, and we were kind of told that you're going to have 7 good years and 3 bad years. That's typically the way it falls on that. And what we saw was year 1, well, not so good. Year 2, not so good. Year 3, 4, COVID, right? And we are just sitting there in 2023 with our broker from the Horton Group. And I said, is there any way that I can just pay a certain amount of money each month to the employees and let them pick something?
By the way, we do have something.
Yeah, and he goes, it's called an ICHRA, is what you're talking about. And once you see it, you'll never go back. And immediately from right there, he had me, I was at attention on it. And I said, well, tell me more about this, right? And that's how we got introduced to Gravie. We started working with, that team, and we went through this, and we saw what this could do for our business. And I knew as I started to run the numbers, because we're in healthcare, right? I have 220 people, mostly nurses, CNAs. It is such a tight market, right? And we're very fortunate that we're able to pay our people higher than what most people do, right? So we're on the higher level there, but benefits are just as important to them. And we knew that with this product here, I was starting to not worry so much about what healthcare costs are going to do, because we could come in and save a bunch of money on this. And each employee, if you're 25 or 26, you don't have to pick one of 2 plans that we were offering. Right. They can now pick like over 120. And all our employees came to me and said, this is fantastic, right? Once they got signed up and they saw what they could save, they're getting exactly what they want. And for me, I take some of that risk out of there. Right. And this year, we're going to save somewhere between $300,000 to $400,000
on 200 employees or so.
Yeah, on 200 employees. Right. It's a big deal for us.
Very big.
Interest rates have gone up, inflation, everything has gone up. But in this, with everything else going on, my healthcare insurance is going down.
And is your company in Minnesota?
It is.
Yeah, and I'd say there are some states in the country where the individual market is relatively healthy and in good shape, and Minnesota is one of those states. And in areas like that, ICHRAs right now are more of a solution for businesses. I'd say there's challenges in other parts of the country where the individual market still isn't where it needs to be for ICHRAs to be the solution that we want for a more fulsome set of employers. And I think that's one of the challenges going forward is how do we improve the individual market so there's those affordable variety of options for employees.
Well, and I don't think it should be missed. I think Cory's experience was a great one from a cost and a budgeting perspective. But one of the things that he mentioned is that his employees had a ton of choice and flexibility, right? In those markets where we see good, positive, financial gains, we also see competition. We see carriers who have good network options for employees, so you don't have to switch your doctor by moving to an individual marketplace plan. You see the option to really turn into a true consumer for your healthcare and pit one carrier against another with similar deductibles and out-of-pocket max expenses. And that just doesn't exist, especially in the small to mid-market, right, where it's kind of a one-size-fits-all solution. Even if you offer a couple plan designs, you're offering one carrier with one network and take it or leave it. And there's a stress to the employer in doing that as well. You're making a decision for a group of employees, sometimes as many as 200, 300, 400 employees, inside of one box. And I think the individual market, or the ICHRA specifically, allows employees some choice and flexibility there as well.
And that's the one thing that our employees all came to me. They're like, now someone that's 27, 28 that used to pay $300 a month, they can go on a $0 plan, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, this is amazing. And all their preventative care is still covered. They're happy about that. And I haven't had one employee come to me, because the most important thing that I have to do, right, if we're going to take really good care of people in the dementia space, I have to be a really good employer.
Yes.
Right. And I can't afford to lose employees, right? Because if everything else is great, but my healthcare costs keep going up and I keep passing it on to them, I'm going to start losing them. So this was this year was just a great time for us to make that switch, right? And give them that choice, and at the same time minimize our risk so we can keep, offering great benefits, but at the same time, maybe even increasing some wages where we want to. So, this has allowed us to do a lot of things that our employees they feel it every week and they really appreciate it.
That's fantastic. I'm curious, Cory, how has the choice aspect of it gone for your employees? Because it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Suddenly, Brian, it's funny. You talk about, your employer could pick two choices for you. And for some people that worked really well, I don't have to do any critical thinking here. But with ICHRAs, you do need to do some critical thinking.
Well, and I think that's why we were lucky with how we came into it, how we got connected with you guys. There was a team there that helped our employees navigate that, right? So they just weren't on an island trying to figure this out.
There's an implementation team that's
looking through booklets and stuff like that. We had people there that could help them through this process. And that was, it was worth its weight in gold and getting them through that. So next year, when we take a look at the renewal, it's going to be a lot easier. They're going to be like, oh, I know exactly what I want. I want this. And
I bet a lot of them picked the same plan that they had. They'll just, that's what
Agreed.
a lot of employees do. It's easier.
Yep.
Choice is always good, right? Choice is a good thing. And when we can do it, because everyone has different things that are important to them. Our employees come to me all the time. Well, I need this for mine and this, that. And I'm like, well, we're going to try to find the best solution that's going to be happy for everyone.
Well, it's funny. You talked about going from fully insured to self-funded. And, the big reason employers choose to do that is they don't want to be in the business of health insurance. And ICHRAs take you even further out of an employer being in the business of health insurance.
So
I'll give one stress from having to pick the plan for everybody.
This was the stress for us, right? As a business owner, every Thursday morning, we would get the email from our carrier, and this is when we were self-funded.
You would dread that email. I know what you're going to say, right?
Yeah. Because 1 week it could be $3,000, it could be $5,000
claims that week
that we have to pay, right? And we had 1 week it was like over $200,000. Like, are you kidding me? Now, luckily enough, we were able to absorb that and keep going. But what we were sitting there thinking, what do most companies do when they do that? And their cash is fluctuating in a way that there has to be something better. And I think that quest to find something better, it just kind of led us to the ICHRAs.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is I've noticed as I did a little bit of research that ICHRAs are growing in popularity across the board. And while, we've talked a lot about small and mid-sized employers and you have 200 or so employees, we're seeing large employers starting to take ICHRAs on too. I think I saw a stat that, that the number of large employers that are looking at ICHRAs is up over 100%. So, Brian, why do you think that is? What about ICHRAs are becoming more appealing to the larger employers in the marketplace?
I think it is primarily they didn't know about it, so now they've learned about it, or they've had this adverse experience with their group plan. They're getting a renewal rate that is unaffordable, and it's so unaffordable they are considering dropping insurance, and they reach out and they're like, "What can I do?" It's sort of what Cory's story was. I need another option.
Yep.
Unfortunately, a lot of brokers, I don't think, know about the ICHRA option yet. So that's part of what we need to do is make sure that more employers, when they're asking these questions, get the answer that there is another option. And I think that's part of what our challenge is, and what we're doing here is to grow that education base.
Unfortunately, and maybe this is what you're getting at, the size of the employer doesn't matter at the end of the day when it comes to the cost of the medications, the cost of the actual care. And when you're a large self-funded employer, you feel that pain just as much as 25 life employer or 25 employee population. And so as we're starting to think about the cost of the services and the cost of the things that we're going to have to pay for, those large employers are looking at their claims bucket every week and saying, well, what's costing $200,000? Is it a medication? Is it a service? Is it something that we can actively participate in helping the employee, re-educate the employee in how they're getting care? Or is this just a cost that we're going to have to endure? And as we go further upstream, because we've seen it as well on working with brokers in the enterprise employee space, the 1,000 to 2,000 employee space, they're looking for the same differentiator that the small employer who just can't afford to pay those costs is as well.
It's funny. I mean, I just go back to that day that I was in the boardroom meeting with our broker, and I just flung that question. It was almost like a Hail Mary question that I just threw out there to be like, is there something like this that exists? And when he responded to me, yes, there is. And it's called, and once you see it, you'll never go back. He didn't offer that, right? I mean, here's a guy that knew that's what I needed. He was going to lose out on my business because he didn't offer that, but he still connected me to you guys. So that relationship side, and I just moved to him 1 year before, and we'd actually saved a little bit of money that year in 2023. But yet he still realized that this was the best product. So as a broker, I couldn't thank him enough for what he gave to us.
Because they understand as a good broker that what's in the best interest for Wealshire is going to continue to be in the best interest for Horton. Eric, I'm curious, can you talk a little bit about how brokers can benefit from selling ICHRAs too? I mean, are there cost differentials for brokers?
Yeah, I think it's another tool in their tool belt, to be quite honest. I mean, this is if you think of a broker or consultant's business, they are serving the best interest of their client and trying to do things like mitigate cost through things like rate increases, product for the employees. Are the employees going to be better off by utilizing an individual marketplace plan versus a group plan? So they have a whole myriad of things that they got to look at. We see it a lot where it's cost, right? We also see it a lot where it's like, I have too many employees that are working part-time, and we're in the hospitality space, and I don't know if somebody's going to work 40 hours or 30 hours, and my traditional carrier is holding me accountable in cost increases because of that and needs another option. Well, this is a huge option for those brokers to be able to maybe class out a specific population of employees and offer them a benefit. Maybe it's look at the whole population and say, at the end of the day, does giving someone $350 a month in pre-tax money to buy their own policy work better for them and their families as well? And so, I think for brokers and consultants, it's important to be very, very educated on this product because your employers are asking for it, as Cory mentioned, and being able to educate them on the front end rather than the back end, I think is important.
So Eric used a term classed out, and just to clarify what that is, there's an ability for employers to create classes of employees and make different options between those classes to benefit those groups of employees. So if you wanted to extend coverage to part-time workers, hadn't been offering coverage to part-time workers before, you could keep the full-time workers on the group plan and offer the part-time workers the ICHRA.
Oh, thank you for explaining that. That's helpful. And, Eric, I think your analogy of a toolkit is really important too, because the reality is we know premiums are going to continue to increase. Deductibles and copays are going to continue to go up. Out-of-pocket costs are going to continue to increase. I mean, we've been trying to fix healthcare as a nation for a very long time. And I think ICHRAs is an opportunity for the market to do what it can to help people in an environment where other forces are unmovable.
Yeah. I got a question really quick for Brian, because I think what we've seen over the last couple of years in that class out mentality, we are starting to get into industries that we specifically see as a good fit for ICHRAs. The hospitality space, the home health care space, I think are two high ones. When the executive order was passed down, what were you guys thinking about in terms of the type of employer who would benefit from this type of a product?
Good question. I'd say we probably didn't think about particular industries that could benefit. We were focused on options for small employers that were increasingly not offering coverage. So I think small employers were one group for sure. I actually think companies, new companies, startups that have a relatively young workforce where you don't have older workers that probably have a group of hospitals and doctors that they need to have in their network and are just more open to sort of the defined contribution nature of how this works is one that I think is particularly like well suited for the ICHRA model.
Yeah, I think that the startup mentality is my mind goes right to their budget, right? They're working with not as much capital and they're looking to eventually have more capital, but not as much capital to start. And so setting a budget of X amount of money that comes out of my account every month to pay for medical expenses without having to worry about what the renewal increase is going to be next year, I think that's huge.
Another group of employers, we're seeing with the pandemic and the rise of remote work that a lot of companies have workers spread out across a geographic diverse area, and they're picking a group plan is exceptionally difficult, right? So I think with the modern workforce, like this is just a solution with workers spread out throughout the country, that being able to offer the defined contribution, the worker takes that and buys whatever plan in their area works best for them. Makes a lot of sense.
Let's talk a little bit about the future of ICHRAs, actually, and then I think that will be a good way for us to wrap up. My perception, I think we see this at Gravie, Eric, is that right now a lot of the providers of ICHRAs, and by providers I don't mean the plans on the exchanges, I mean companies like Gravie that help connect employers to ICHRAs, are very employer focused, as they should be, because we need to drive interest among employers. I think at the end of the day, what we need to do is even that equilibrium out a little bit so that we actually also are thinking about what do the members want, what do employees want, and what can a company like Gravie that's connecting a person with their health coverage do to influence that experience, that member experience, especially if you pick a carrier that is not Gravie, we're not responsible for the plan design. We're not responsible for the network, but we are responsible for that employee experience. And I think to drive participation, you ultimately have to be thinking about the member and what it feels like to be the employee picking an ICHRA and managing an ICHRA as much as it is for the employer who's saving hundreds of thousands of dollars. Wanted to see if anybody had some thoughts about what we could see next. What's coming down the pike in terms of ICHRAs that are going to make them even more consumer friendly? Because the reality is the individual market, we're talking about consumer purchasing, which is a little bit different.
I have a take, but I'll lean on Cory first because I want to hear that perspective from an employer, right? We went through an implementation on an ICHRA product, and the team at Gravie was heavily involved in that implementation. But even then, we learned a lot from how the employees are purchasing. What are the questions that they have when they're going through the online experience of shopping for their own health plan. And it's important for us to hear that feedback too, because we evolve based on what that experience looks like for you guys.
And I think we're evolving too, right? We're already planning out how are we going to do the next year's deal, right? The meetings that we're going to have, how we're going to introduce to our new employees how this whole thing works, how they can pick their plans, right? So we're kind of building up what we think is going to be useful for them in picking that healthcare, because before, again, they never had to do that. But I'm just looking forward to seeing what you guys can come up with on it from our side. And I think, as we work collaboratively together to solve some of these things and create these win-win things, that's what I'm most excited about for the next enrollment period, right? And I think it's going to be a great success. But I think the buzz that we've already created around our employees saying, hey, this is new, this is different, this is good, I'm saving money, I'm getting the care that I want and the protection that I want, I think we're moving in the right direction. Yeah.
I think, I'm relying on companies like Gravie to help employers and employees and ease the transition to ICHRAs. And I think, there's obviously, whenever you do something new, there are challenges and lessons learned, and I think there are fixes to improve that experience. From a policy perspective, I can tell you that ICHRAs have bipartisan appeal. It has elements that appeal to Republicans and Democrats. Republicans like the defined contribution, sort of the empowerment of the employee to choose the coverage that works best for them. And I think for Democrats, it is building on the Affordable Care Act, right? People are taking the contributions and buying a plan in the Affordable Care Act. And arguably, if the economics of this work out the way I think, and it's mostly relatively healthy people, at least compared to the average exchange enrollees, it's going to improve the overall individual market. And I've sort of talked about this virtuous cycle where you get employers offering these contributions, employees buying in the individual market. That's a signal to insurers that there's a market opportunity here, so that they come and they offer products that appeal to the individual. And that's ultimately what we want, is we want the insurers to be offering products that appeal to the individual, not to the employer, because the employer's preferences are different from the individual's.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think you're absolutely right about, I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about how there are some states where the individual market is in better shape than others. So if ICHRAs can actually be a force that drives healthier individual markets nationwide, then that's a wonderful extra added benefit, right?
This is one of the first years in the last decade. Gravie's been selling individual plans to employers since 2013. This is the first time in the last decade that the carriers specifically took note on what that experience was going to look like for the employees. Now, short plug here, we can go a lot farther in that, right? This ICHRA product is something that's here to stay, and I think the carriers can do a lot more to enhance the plan options, the network accessibility, the design of the plan.
It will force pressure on them as well.
That's force pressure on them, but it is from an experience perspective. An individual, if you just think of the core coming out of a group plan mentality where the employer made all the decisions for the employees, who picked the plan, who enrolled them sometimes, who would make exceptions, right? This is a different experience. Employees will be taking an action. And that action could be as much as comparing and contrasting two plans, but it also could go down into the weeds so much of paying for the plan. How do I put my account information, right? And so I think you asked about where are we going to go next? And I think one of the things we're working on at Gravie is enhancing the ability for employees to pay that premium, and then looking into ways to pay for other expenses as well on the back end through partnerships that we've been developing. And I think that carrier relationship is so key in this having a ton of success, because in addition to competitive products in the market, the experience to the member, I think, is paramount in this being successful.
Yeah, and I think what you just touched about with the plan value is so important. So I think when I think about the future and what we're looking at from a Gravie perspective and what can we do is how do we add those wraparound products where, within your ICHRA, you can also be looking at buy-ups for other products, other point services. I think we're looking at things like plan selection. I don't know if any of you have ever gone through you have obviously, Cory, if you've gone through the journey of selecting an ICHRA on the way it's set up, it's a very difficult process. So we're looking at how can we simplify that plan selection process. And then lastly, you've got value, you've got selection. We're looking at post-enrollment. How do you, it's not all signed, sealed, delivered, and done once you set somebody up. What does management of that ICHRA look like, both for the employer and the employee? What is, how can we provide more self-service tools for employers and employees so they're not reliant upon a carrier who then sends them to their ICHRA provider who said, and you go back and forth and you get bounced between different experts. So I think the future for ICHRAs looks really rosy in terms of the impact it can have on the individual market, in terms of the impact it can have on competition among carriers, in terms of what we're able to do for employers and savings and predictability, and what we're able to do for employees who hopefully will get more customized products that work for them specifically.
That was well said.
Very much. Just as the business owner side of it, again, just being so grateful that I got introduced to it when we did. And just sitting back here, there's so many people that I know that I've talked about this where they're like, I want to know more about this too.
Yeah.
Right. Other people. And I just can't see how this can't have exponential growth going forward. I mean, it was a no-brainer for us. And I know there's a lot of other CEOs and presidents that are in that same position of having to make tough decisions. There are other solutions out there. And I'm just grateful that I found this one.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, Cory. It's great to have you here. Brian, thank you so much for spending some time with us and educating us on where these things came from. And Eric, always appreciate your perspective on what brokers and benefits consultants are seeing in the marketplace and how they're reacting. So I think we're all bullish on the future of ICHRAs, and looking forward to maybe we can follow up this conversation a year from now and see how much progress has been made.
Absolutely.
Great to be here.
Thanks, everybody. Well, it was great to have that conversation with Brian and Cory and Eric to learn more about where ICHRAs came from, how they've been evolving in the last couple of years, and how great of an impact they really are making for both employers and employees. Thanks so much to Cory and Brian for joining us on this episode of It's a Gravy Thing. If you'd like to learn more, head to gravy.com. It's a Gravy Thing is produced by Gravy in partnership with Pod People. Thanks so much for listening. And if you liked what you heard, rate and review the show. And of course, subscribe to It's a Gravy Thing to make sure you never miss out on a new episode.